On today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast, is it Hertl time for the Vegas Golden Knights? We'll find out.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into another episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. We are your team every day. We thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. On today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast, we will discuss Thatcher Demko's timetable and look at how the Vancouver Canucks have done in his absence over the last couple of weeks. We'll talk about the Winnipeg Jets in scuffle mode here as we head down the final few weeks of the season. And the Vegas Golden Knights did it again. They pulled the wool over our eyes. Tomas Hertl is practicing for Vegas here this week. So naturally, he's going to come back and lead them to a Stanley Cup championship. We'll talk about that and more here today. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wilds, one half of the dynamic duo for your Western Conference Tuesday, joined as always by Nick Morgan of Locked On Predators. Nick, a full slate here because not only do we have all of these topics, we're on panic watch for the Nashville Predators as their point streak has now ended. Dallas is evidently never going to lose again. The Minnesota Wilds tried the empty net OT magic, and that blew up in their faces. Busy week for the Western Conference here.
Yeah, it's enough to make you pick up a hockey stick and throw it at the nearest ref, a la Ryan Hartman.
I forgot to mention my own team in that regard. Thank you for picking that one up because, 3-game suspension for Ryan Hartman for throwing his stick out on the ice. The video finally surfaced for that one, and so Hartman gets 3 games, but we'll be talking about the reaction to that on Locked On Wilds for today as well. So I'll steer you in that direction for more on that situation. But we've got Vancouver, who is trying to put themselves in position to win the President's Trophy, currently trailing the Dallas Stars by 3 points in the West, 4 points overall as the New York Rangers have that top spot in terms of points. But for Vancouver, obviously they've been trying to manage without Thatcher Demko for the last few weeks, who was put on long-term injured reserve. This is a huge for Vancouver fans, but the hope is, from the sounds of it, because it was a retroactive placement back to March 9th, the hope is that he's going to be able to come back here before too long, get himself a couple of games of action, and be ready to help lead Vancouver once the postseason begins.
Yeah, it sounds like, because it was when they announced that he was out, they were like, oh, he's going to be out 2 to 4 weeks probably. And that was 3 weeks ago. So I'm assuming he's going to be back soon. It's kind of funny because it feels like the Canucks are doing, okay without him right now. Like 6-3-1 in their last 10. They did have losses to Dallas and LA in the past week, but you look at those games and it's like, it wasn't really goaltending that was the reason for the loss. Like, it's not like one of those games where like Thatcher Demko's in the lineup and makes 2 more saves and it's, it goes the other way. I think Casey DeSmith, you and I were laughing at this before. Casey DeSmith has somehow been a freaking heater over the past 3-4 weeks. So the Canucks have that going for them. some guy we've never heard of before named Artur Silovs. I think I may have just made up a name, but he played very, very well in a win over Anaheim the other night. So they're getting good goaltending. It's funny because I don't think I think there's like a lot of people that maybe criticize the Canucks for sort of petering out at this point in the season, but I don't think that's because of Demko's injury. They're just, the offense is kind of cooled down just a tick a little bit, and they're still sort of feel like maybe a depth defender, another defensive pair short of maybe winning some of those close, low scoring matchups.
Yeah, and you look at what has happened in those games. I mean, you can go back to they beat the Ducks, the Kings, the Golden Knights, and then they beat the Jets 5-0. Two close losses to Colorado, 4-3, and then a close loss to the Washington Capitals, who just refuse to lose at this point. And the winning streak that they're on, the hot stretch that they're on, is entirely fueled by their goaltending and Alex Ovechkin. So you come up on the wrong end of that game, you lose to the Kings 3-2, you lose to the Stars 3-1. But beyond that, I mean, you're putting away the teams that you should. You're just maybe coming up a bounce or two short against those other teams. And you would expect in those matchups against teams that are in the postseason, because all of those 4 teams that they lost to during this stretch are all in the playoffs. And so you get a bounce here, you get a bounce there, and you maybe come away 2-2 in that stretch instead of 0-4. But yeah, it has not been the goaltending by any stretch for Vancouver here since March 9th, since this retroactive placement for Thatcher Demko. If you look at some of the players in the lineup over that same span, I mean, Quinn Hughes, 8 points but no goals. You've got guys that have put together some decent stretches there, but maybe not the high end level that they were at before. So I think it's just a matter of kind of those coin flip playoff type games over this stretch. So Vancouver they're still finding a way to kind of keep trucking along, but I mean, Demko is playing at a Vezina caliber level before he went down, and so you're still winning games. You're just maybe not winning them as crisply as you were previously.
Yeah, and not to minimize Demko's injury, because hey, he's back. Like, you got a pretty good chance of winning some of those 2-1, 3-2 type really tight contests because he's just been one of the best goalies in the NHL this year. Just kind of more of a compliment on Casey DeSmith and this guy who apparently exists stepping up and giving Vancouver some pretty good goaltending in his absence. But yeah, this isn't suddenly the Canucks are falling down to earth or they're mid or anything like that. I just think it's, I just think it's a situation where some of the players aren't as red hot as they were earlier this season, but there's 2 weeks left in the regular season, and knowing the quality of player that Elias Pettersson, Quinn Hughes, JT Miller, Brock Besser, knowing the quality of the way that those guys play, it's not going to be out of the question for them to absolutely pick it up and go on an unreal pace again, not just the end of the regular season, but into the playoffs as well.
Yeah, and it's a 5-3-1 stretch. You've got you're scoring 2.89 goals per game, so that's probably the number that you'd circle. Giving up 2.11, so still really good there. Power play at 19.2%, so that's probably another number that could be a little higher. But yeah, it's still a pretty good stretch, just not as crisp and as sharp as it was previously. And to be honest, it would be preferable to losing 6 straight games, which is what the Winnipeg Jets have done. And so We'll talk about the Jets. We'll talk about Rick Bowness saying enough is enough as we continue today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast after this. Today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. The sports calendar is loaded, and FanDuel is making it even more exciting to get in on the action. Because right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on the NCAA tournament, Major League Baseball, NBA, NHL, and so much more. All you have to do is load in one bet, one $5 bet. Just pick whoever the San Jose Sharks are playing, or even better, this is a guarantee. This is a surefire guarantee. Go pick whoever the Colorado Rockies are playing in Major League Baseball. They gave up a Little League home run to the Chicago Cubs. And so if you want a surefire $5 bet, just go put $5 on whoever the Colorado Rockies are playing, and then you've got $200 in bonus bets for the Final Four this weekend, for a full slate of NHL games. You name it, you get $200 in bonus bets if that $5 first bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to make your first bet a big win. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. Once again, we are your team every day, and we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe if you have not already, so you don't miss out on any of our episodes throughout the week with our wide array of NHL hosts covering Western Conference, Eastern Conference, NHL at large, power rankings, you name it. Locked On NHL has got it. Nick, the Winnipeg Jets are in a bit of trouble here because they have currently lost 6 in a row. I'm going to pull up the exact numbers over that span. They're 0-5-1 in that 6-game span. They have scored 10 goals in 6 games. They've given up 24 goals in 6 games, which by my math is 4 goals per game. Their power play is at 4.6%. Their penalty kill is at 66.7%. And they're only winning 43% of their faceoffs. And so Rick Bowness was asked about continuing to just try to kind of fight through it. And he said, and I quote, this was from Mike McIntyre on X, who covers the Winnipeg Jets for Winnipeg News. Winnipeg Jets head coach Rick Bowness, and I quote, "We can't keep running back the same pairs. We can't keep running back the same lines. That's enough. 6 games in a row. It's nice to say we hung in there and we had a chance, but there's no moral victories. We have to find a way to get the 2 points." And Nick, you look at it now, Winnipeg is starting to kind of fall back from the top of the Western Conference standings. Dallas with 103 points, Colorado and Vancouver with 100 each, Winnipeg now with 94. And so as strong as the Jets looked all season, like this is the kind of thing you worry about a little bit as the season starts to draw to a close, is going into the postseason on a cold spell.
That was the big question going into the season with the Winnipeg Jets this year, was the depth there? Was the depth there to kind of overrule some of these cold streaks that, they would inevitably go on? This team for the first half of the season, they had some good players contributing, but they live and die off Connor Hellebuyck. And Connor Hellebuyck has been, I'm not going to say bad these past, these past couple of weeks or so. But he's not the same goalie that he was at the start of the season. And he's getting a lot of minutes right now. He has had 5 starts since actually now 6 starts since March 23rd. Like, he has played in every single Jets game since then. He's got to be getting kind of tired. And, you know, it's, if your goaltending is not 100% there, then you're going to need some players in front to kind of pick up the slack. And it just hasn't been happening this year. Mark Scheifele is the Jets' leading scorer. He has something like 2 points in his last 7 games. That's a little bit of a concern. You have Kyle Connor, who is, you know, very good scorer, 50 points in 58 games this year, but defensively, he's kind of been losing some battles. Also, he's gone a little bit cold, just 2 points in his last 5 games. Josh Morrissey, not quite the same offensive impact over the past month or so as he had at the beginning of the season. So you're just kind of reaching a point here where it's almost like everything is going wrong for Winnipeg at the same time. Hellebuyck is looking like he might be getting a little bit tired here to end the season. And, you know, when that happens with your goaltending, you got to have people kind of step up in front of them and carry the slack, whether it's defense, making some plays, or getting, just sort of getting possession of the puck a little bit more. You got to have scores go out and, you know, give your goalie a couple goal cushion, or, you know, being able to score a clutch goal. And it's just not happening anywhere for Winnipeg right now. And you mentioned, you know, they're falling off the top of the pedestal in the West. Just pointing out, Nashville's 2 games behind them right now, and they no longer have games in hand. So, you know, there's a really real possibility here that if the Jets don't turn things around, they could be looking at going from potentially the President's Trophy winner to a wild card spot in a span of a month.
Wow. Well, and to peel it back a little further, like if you go back to, I was just scrolling through the replies to that tweet on X. I was just scrolling through the replies, and somebody mentions, Jets Burner mentions, 6 games is the losing streak, but the losses have been together since January 20th, and the Jets are 500 in that span. Nick, in the last 31 games, the Winnipeg Jets have 32 points. They are 15, 14, and 2. They're 17th in the NHL in that span. And on the flip side, Dallas is 3rd in the NHL in points with 46. Colorado is 8th with 39. And as you mentioned, Nashville, they are tied with Colorado in that same span with 39 points. And so you look at the peripheral numbers over that span. The Jets are scoring 2.61 goals per game. That's not great. 2.74 goals allowed. That's not terrible. But then power play 19.3%, penalty kill 77.4%. At the end of the day, they're beating the teams below them in the standings. They just have not been, again, they have not been as fine and as sharp against some of those teams that are at or above them in the standings at this point. And so there's still time to kind of right the ship. But yeah, that would be something. If after Winnipeg was leading the Central Division at points in the early part of the season, to all of a sudden then look up and now you are in that wild card picture with Nashville vaulting over you.
Yeah. And here's the other thing about that, Seth. The Winnipeg Jets schedule, have you seen it for the rest of the season?
Do I want to?
It's not great if you're a Jets fan. Let me just put it out there. So they're playing LA right now. For, you know, we're pre-recording this, so they could win that game 5-0 or 5-1 tomorrow, and this whole conversation would be obsolete. But they got Minnesota coming up on Saturday. That's always, you know, a tough game. They got Nashville next week at Bridgestone Arena. Then they have Dallas in Dallas. Then they have Colorado in Colorado. Then they have Seattle, who is somehow still in the playoff hunt. But that's going to be a tough matchup. And then they end the season against Vancouver. So you have at least 4 or 5 playoff teams in these last 8 games. And then you look over at a team like Nashville, who's got, they've got Calgary, they've got Chicago, they've got Columbus, they've got New Jersey. So the schedule kind of doesn't do Winnipeg any favors.
Man, what a final month of the season for the Winnipeg Jets. You have road trips that are at Columbus, at the New York Rangers, at New Jersey, at the New York Islanders, at Washington, then some home games, and then at Minnesota, at Nashville, at Dallas, at Colorado, like in your final month of games. I think at this point, every single team is on the wavelength of like, I just want to talk to the NHL scheduler. Like, I just want to talk. I just want to talk it out and figure out why we did the things that we did. Because that is brutal for the final month of the season.
Well, I'll say this. If they hang on and get one of these top 3 spots on the Western Conference and they turn things around, you can certainly say they've earned it.
Yes, 100%. And this is something too that, because of the structure that they play, where their bread and butter is limiting goals and limiting teams from scoring, if they can just get back to that and get back on track, that's going to be a tough out in the playoffs. That type of style is a tough out. So
yeah, agree. 100%.
We'll see what happens there. I guess they just have to hope that they don't match up with the reigning Stanley Cup champions, because Nick, do you know what time it is? Do you know what time it is?
Is it time for all of the Vegas injured players to magically be healed at the exact same time, which happens to coordinate with the start of the Stanley Cup playoffs?
Yes, it appears as though it is time for reinforcements for the Vegas Golden Knights. We'll talk about that as we finish today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast after this.
Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. We are in the stretch run of the NHL season, and whether your team is making a run towards the cup, whether they're right on that bubble, or whether they're crashing, burned, and hanging out with San Jose in the bottom of the standings, you can still win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick whether studs like Nathan McKinnon, Alex Ovechkin, Sidney Crosby, or Connor McDavid will record more or less than their Sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more in a given game. If you can nail 8 of those player bets, you win 100 times your money on a Sleeper. You heard me, hockey fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability.
One final segment of today's episode of the Locked On NHL podcast. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen each and every day. Seth Toupal and Nick Morgan finishing it up. And Nick, it is Tomas Hertl time. Tomas Hertl time. Report from ESPN Fantasy Hockey. I don't know why I'm using ESPN Fantasy Hockey, but Tomas Hertl, non-contact jersey, was a participant in practice yesterday for the Vegas Golden Knights. And here's the spin. Hertl will likely need to be cleared for contact and log at least one full practice before making his Golden Knights debut. but he's clearly trending in the right direction. The 30-year-old forward racked up 15 goals and 34 points through 48 games with San Jose before undergoing knee surgery in mid-February and subsequently being dealt to Vegas at the trade deadline. Nick, it was always going to be just get in for the Vegas Golden Knights and hope that their reinforcements could come back. And it looks as though we once again are on the brink of that being the new reality.
Yeah, what did you say he has to go through? Like cleared for contact, then go through practices and all that.
Yep.
So we're thinking maybe a 2-week process here.
Yeah, I would say between a week and 2 weeks is probably a good estimate.
And when does the Stanley Cup playoffs start?
Not for quite some time.
No, it starts on April 20th. That's 2 weeks. Commit to the bit here, Seth. Come on. Look, yeah, it's been the same way for Vegas the past few years. I think they're kind of feeling the same way about some other players on their roster right now. The big one is other than Hertl, the big one is Mark Stone as well. It seems like they're going to be holding out hope. Maybe he can kind of work his way back for the postseason. That one may be a little bit iffy. But yeah, I mean, this is kind of just been the Vegas thing. It's like, look, we can get to the playoffs. This cap restriction goes away. And then all of a sudden, it's like, the like Aomir and Gandalf coming over the ridge of the Battle of Helm's Deep. It's just these massive reinforcements coming in. I guess that strategy has worked because it got Vegas a Stanley Cup last year.
Yeah, and I'm just looking because you mentioned Mark Stone, and so I'm like, oh, maybe we should do a Mark Stone update too. And the last update we had was a month ago, in which the Golden Knights, Bruce Cassidy in particular, said that Stone was week to week with an upper body injury.
And how many weeks is he thinking? 2 to 3?
Well, if it was week to week a month ago, that's been 4 weeks, and there are 2 weeks left. So 6 weeks is probably enough to get him back.
I would say probably.
And then all of a sudden, here they are again.
Yeah. I did not know until I was doing research for this that the Vegas Golden Knights are back in the top 3 in the division. Yeah. So they've leapfrogged LA again. Remember, they were down in the second wild card spot for a hot second, but they've turned things around. They've won 7 out of their last 10. Jack Eichel has started to look like Jack Eichel of last year. He's an absolutely beast right now.
Yep.
And the other thing to keep in mind is Logan Thompson is playing like the Logan Thompson of early last year. 1 goal allowed in each of his last 4 starts. An absolutely unreal save percentage over the past 2 weeks or so. The fact that Vegas is getting the goaltending hot again, even with Aiden Hill sort of, still struggling with injuries. The fact that the guys who aren't injured are starting to heat up again. Jonathan Marchessault having another big season. Obviously we mentioned Eichel. This is starting to look like the Vegas Golden Knights team that, made that big run last year. And I'll tell you what, I don't know if they're going to finish in the top 3. I don't know if they're going to, fall out and be a wild card spot. All I know is if I'm in the West, that is not a team I want to play in round 1, Seth.
Not at all, because if I'm Edmonton, I am extremely annoyed right now because it was all setting up to play the Los Angeles Kings in round 1. And you feel like that is a matchup that is way more favorable than Vegas, because Vegas, again, like they're not one of the top scoring teams in the West. They are, middle of the pack in terms of playoff contenders as far as goals against. So it's like they don't, they don't stand out in particular categories, but they just win. They just win games. That's all they do.
Yeah.
And so if I'm Edmonton, I am irate because I would much rather have gone against the Kings than the Golden Knights.
Yeah. And that's it's kind of goes back to the conversation we had last week is, do we really want that matchup to be round 1? Isn't that like a matchup we want to see round 2 or 3?
Mm-hmm.
We got to fix this playoff battle at some point, because the reward for being a consistently good team all year around should not be the hottest team in the NHL at the
because
moment.
Here's how
not
this,
trying to avoid anything, but yeah, like I'd like to see that different.
So here's how this would go. Dallas would get the number 1 overall seed. They would play the Los Angeles Kings. That would be your 1 versus 8. Your 2 seed, due to regulation wins, would be the Colorado Avalanche. They would play the Vegas Golden Knights in round 1.
Which would be a banger, to be fair.
That is juicy. That's a juicy matchup right there.
Yeah.
Come on, Gary. Just give us 1 through 8. Like, we're not going to stop clamoring for it until you do it.
Yeah, exactly. Just think of the possibilities here.
We're trying to cultivate those divisional matchups in round 1. Yeah, Colorado Winnipeg is going to be just a banger of a series. Not.
Yeah.
Sorry, Winnipeg fans, but it's Colorado.
Especially if they fall out of that point. Fall out of the top 3.
Just do 1 through 8. That's all. That's all I'm asking.
Yeah.
That's all I'm asking.
Just go old school.
But who knows? By the time we talk next week, Vegas will probably have vaulted Edmonton in the standings.
Yeah. And Winnipeg will have won like 4 straight.
We'll keep an eye.
They're winning games 6-0 and just killing it.
We'll keep an eye out, because there's a lot to keep an eye on here in the Western Conference, and that's why Western Conference Tuesday has you covered all season long. So make sure to subscribe on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We also have throughout the week NHL at Large on Mondays. You've got Eastern Conference on Wednesdays. You've got Power Rankings on Thursdays, and you have more at Large NHL coverage on Fridays. We get you covered every single day of the week. So make sure to subscribe to Locked On NHL so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We have new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.